The most likely place to find a car if it isn't on the road is in a garage or parked on the street or in a car park. Failing that, they're most likely to be found in showrooms or perhaps in museums or specialist exhibitions if they're interesting or valuable. Those that aren't tend to end up being crushed when they're no longer of any practical use. Some cars don't follow those paths, though. They end up becoming abandoned and forgotten, even if they're incredibly rare and valuable. BMWs are fairly desirable cars. Many people consider them to be status symbols, and they're often driven by middle to high-ranking business people. There will always be a market for them, which makes it all the more strange that this collection of 11 1994 BMW 5 Series vehicles was left behind in a warehouse in Blagoevgrad, Bulgaria, for 25 years. They were eventually discovered in January 2019. None of the cars have ever been driven. In fact, they've never even been registered for road use. 9 of the cars are 520s, with the other 2 belonging to the slightly more powerful 525 class. Nobody knows for sure how they ended up being left like this, but the most popular theory is that they were bought for a car rental company that never got off the ground. While the exteriors of the sedans are dusty and in a few cases scratched, the interiors are so pristine that the wrapping and covering is still in place on several of them. To complicate their situation, they now cannot be registered in Bulgaria because they're non-compliant with emissions standards for first-time registrations. So for them to have a future at all, they'll need to be exported somewhere else. Speaking of brand new cars left to fend for themselves in unlikely places, why were 56 Toyota Camrys abandoned close to Lake Smolino near Chelyabinsk in Russia in 2020? When pictures of the stranded vehicles went viral on social media in September that year, local residents claimed that the vehicles had already been parked there for 6 months. One possibility is that the cars belong to local government officials. The land they're standing on belongs to the local Chelyabinsk administration, and there appears to be a guard keeping watch over them. Despite that, nobody ever comes to drive one away, and it's obvious from looking at these pictures that most, if not all, of these cars have never been driven at all. If these cars were bought by the government, it looks like a lot of money has been wasted. 56 cars don't come cheap, even if you get a bulk discount from buying them together. And after 6 months exposed to the elements, it's likely that they'd need attention from a mechanic before any of them could be approved for use. What a waste! We imagine that most of you are familiar with the concept of a barn find, a valuable car that's been parked in a barn, garage, or storage container for years, and then forgotten about until someone discovers it by accident. It's hard to imagine a more delightful barn find than this 1985 Lamborghini Countach, which was discovered in the American Midwest in 2015. By that point, it's thought to have been inside the barn for a full 15 years. Despite being found in America, it may never have been driven on American roads. The car is set up according to European specifications and has license plates from the Principality of Monaco. The Lambo was put up for sale not long after it was found. According to the sale listing, it still had all of its original fixtures and fittings, including the mighty 5-liter V12 engine, capable of pushing the car from 0 to 60 miles per hour in less than 5 seconds. The paintwork could do with some attention, and we'd have reservations about picking up a car that hadn't moved for 15 years and trying to drive it away, but it still went for just under $250,000 at auction. The name Norman Timms ought to be familiar to anyone who loves classic cars. While he might be known to the wider public as an Indy 500 designer, he spent much of the 1940s and 1950s designing unique cars for private collectors. The 1948 Buick Special Streamliner was probably his finest achievement, and the Norman Timms Special version of the car was the best of the best. It took him 3 years to finish it, which made it even more of a tragedy when an American Air Force officer bought it less than 10 years later, painted over the original bodywork with a boring shade of white, and then left it standing in the Californian desert for 50 years. It was in an awful state when it was eventually recovered in 2002, but you'd never know that from looking at it today. Classic car enthusiast Gary Kernavy spent 8 years working on it and was able to retain 90% of its original body while simultaneously restoring its distinctive original color. He even managed to get the original 1948 Buick engine up and running, which can't have been easy. After being mistreated for half a century, let's hope it never gets abandoned again. The history of the 1975 Barris Snake Pit is murky and full of myth and rumor. Some people say that it once reached 300 miles per hour during testing in California, whereas others say it's never turned a wheel in anger. If the latter is true, that's a waste of some serious power. The car has 6 Cobra Ford V8s tethered to 2 Ford C6 automatic transmissions and should be capable of that 300 miles per hour speed easily. In fact, it should go well beyond it. Barris spent over $100,000 developing the car with the intention that it would break land speed records, but it never did. It disappeared from history in the late 1970s until the 1990s, when it was shipped to France for a Euro Disney display that never happened. After standing still in Paris for over a decade, it went to a private collector in 2006, and as best as we can tell, spent another 6 years doing nothing until it turned up at auction in England. This time, without a reserve price and described as being not in running condition. Wherever it is now, we hope it's with someone who's going to drive and enjoy it as Barris intended it to be. Chevrolet had big ideas about the future of its vehicle range as the date of 1955's Motorama approached, and they wanted to show off as many of them at once as possible. That's why they built the Chevrolet Biscayne. This car of the future showcased the company's new fiberglass and reinforced plastic bodywork, stratospheric windshield, and pillar-free 4-door design. Under the hood was an experimental high-compression V8 engine with a high-lift cam, 4-barrel carburetor, and dual exhaust. All of this was a big deal to the company and its customers at the time. While it was technologically advanced, it wasn't an attractive car. That's probably why it was discarded shortly after Motorama and was eventually tracked down to the infamous War Hoops junkyard in Detroit, USA in 1990, by which time it was wrecked so badly that it was in 4 pieces. According to War Hoops, it had been with them for 40 years. It was thought to be so badly damaged that nothing could be done to save it. But in 1999, detailed pictures of the car's original chassis were found inside an old filing cabinet at the General Motors Tech Center. That allowed a restoration project to commence in 2005, which was completed in 2007. The Biscayne rides again. In 1982, Mazda thought it would be a good idea to enter the annual 24-hour Le Mans race in France with 2 254i racing cars. They were wrong. The cars performed badly, and the model was immediately scrapped. For years, it was thought that both of the racing cars were destroyed as part of that process, but that wasn't the case. They were shipped to Japan, repainted, and raced in the JPSC series without anyone knowing their true history or identity. One of them was destroyed after a bad crash at the Fuji Speedway during the 1990s, leaving the remaining unit as the only one of its kind still in existence. In 2018, it was found in a warehouse in a remote western Japanese prefecture, painted pink and in a poor state of repair. While it would have been tempting to write it off at that point, Mazda chief mechanic Mr. Chachimoto was delighted to see it and confirmed that it was the genuine article. Mazda has taken ownership of the car and sent it to a specialist restoration team to return it to its 1982 condition. If all goes well, they hope to be able to race it at classic car events. We don't know which car was in a sorrier state, the Lamborghini Countach we looked at earlier, or this Lamborghini Countach that was found in October 2019 after 40 years stuck inside a tiny container. It looks like it might have had an accident before it was stashed away. This is actually a Lamborghini Countach Periscopio and is one of only 150 ever made. It's now in the hands of a Swiss company called Kidston Motor Cars. who are keeping tight-lipped regarding the matter who tipped them off about its location. What is clear, though, is that they have quite a job ahead of them if they're going to return it to the way it looked in 1978 when it was brand new. That's what they specialize in, though, and they have an excellent incentive to do the job well. Presuming full restoration is possible, the vehicle would have a value of around $1.2 million. Fortunately for them, the car's 4-liter V12 engine is positioned in the rear rather than the front, so whatever accident smashed up the hood of the Lambo shouldn't have done too much damage to the engine. When we look at these pictures of a dusty, dirty 1958 Aston Martin DB Mark III sports saloon, we want to have serious words with the person who let it get in this state. Apparently, they considered this an acceptable way to store their beautiful car. We disagree. You don't allow something so stunning to get so filthy. According to Coy's, the auction house that handled the auction of the classic car in 2015, it was registered for the first time in April 1959 and spent 30 years with its original owner before being sold on to someone in Derbyshire, England. They initially used it every day, but claimed they had to put it into storage in 1994 due to work commitments. That was the last time it moved for more than 20 years. The sale listing says that the engine and gearbox were both fully functional the last time the car was turned on, but 20 years of standing idle might have put paid to that. Hopefully, the damage is more aesthetic than it is mechanical, and the person who ultimately paid $180,000 for it at that 2015 auction is getting value for money out of their purchase. We have urban explorers to thank for our next incredible discovery, which comes from Bristol in England. It's a collection of extremely rare supercars hiding in the garage of the Bristol Car Company. The company is no longer in business, and it appears nobody thought to sell off the existing stock before closing the gates. The combined value of this unique fleet, which was found and photographed in November 2020, is in excess of $40 million. One of the vehicles lurking in the dark is the prototype Bristol Fighter, thought to be the only one ever made. Elsewhere is a Bristol 409 Bullet Speedster and a 2008 Bentley. Even the wooden frames that were used to mold the bodies of the cars are there. The Bristol Car Company was liquidated in May 2020 due to the impact of the global pandemic. Based on this discovery, that doesn't make sense. Shouldn't a company that's been liquidated sell off its assets first? There must be someone out there who's interested in $40 million worth of rare vehicles, some of which are without parallel. At least those Bristol cars have had the luxury of being sealed away in secure parking, where the worst effects of the elements can't damage them. These old Citroens have had no such luxury. They caused quite a stir when they were listed for sale in April 2018 as a collection, seemingly presented without titles and in various states of disrepair. Nobody seems to know quite how the Citroens came to be in this predicament, but the most popular theory is that they're victims of Noel Slade, a notorious American fraudster who took deposits for purchases or repairs of Citroens and then never handed them back to their owners. Nevertheless, there are some prize assets to be had here, including a Citroen Traction Avant that looks like it may still be salvageable. It was one of the company's first ever executive cars. The early Citroen DS might get up and running again with a little care and attention too. Several of the cars appear to be missing key components, which is consistent with Noel Slade's cut-and-shut methods. But you never know what might be repairable so long as it ends up in the hands of someone who has the knowledge to fix it. It might be reasonable to assume that anyone who owned a Porsche would drive it as much as possible and take every opportunity to show it off. But not everybody is reasonable. This 1974 Porsche 911 Targa has spent decades in a storage container, and like the Lamborghini Countach we looked at earlier, it appears to have reached America without ever being driven on American soil. It's still set up for European driving and appears to have undergone at least one terrible attempt at repainting. The European spec means it comes with H4 lighting rather than inferior American sealed beams, lighter doors, and less restrictive emissions equipment. But those potential advantages might be nullified by the missing factory wiper, rear fender, and mirrors. The engine is a factory replacement, and so the numbers don't match the chassis, but there's official documentation to resolve that issue. That means the Porsche still has value, but it appears to be at the outer edge of its desirability. We don't know who vandalized the poor thing so badly that it had to be locked away from the world like this, but we hope its next owner can fix the damage.
Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.